Welcome to the Tax Identity Theft Awareness Week webinar, co-hosted by the Federal Trade Commission and the Identity Theft Resource Center. My name is Ari Lazarus, and I'm in the Division of Consumer and Business Education at the Federal Trade Commission, and I'll be your host today. So let's get started with today's speakers. We have Lisa Weintraub-Schifferle from the FTC and Eva Velasquez from the Identity Theft Resource Center. Lisa Weintraub-Schifferle is an attorney in the Federal Trade Commission's Division of Consumer and Business Education. At the FTC, she regularly leads trainings on identity theft, scams, and small business cybersecurity. She has also litigated data security, privacy, and fraud cases. Before arriving at the FTC, Lisa spent 8 years at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau as a staff attorney and supervising attorney. Eva Velasquez is the president and CEO at the Identity Theft Resource Center, a nonprofit organization which serves victims of identity theft. Velasquez previously served as the vice president of operations for the San Diego Better Business Bureau and spent 21 years at the San Diego District Attorney's Office. Eva has a passion for consumer protection and privacy issues and is constantly striving to educate the public about these important topics. And with those introductions, I'll turn it over to Lisa to get us started. Lisa?
Thanks, Ari, and thanks to Eva and ITRC for working with us on this webinar for Tax Identity Theft Awareness Week. Today, we're going to talk about tax identity theft, and we'll start by setting the stage by talking about what is identity theft more generally. Then we'll look at tax identity theft in particular. How does it happen? How can you reduce your likelihood of becoming a victim? And what to do if you are a victim. In particular, we'll focus on identitytheft.gov, a new tool to report identity theft and get a personalized recovery plan. And then we'll close by talking about IRS imposter scams, which are those calls from someone who claims to be from the IRS and says you owe taxes. So let's start by what is identity theft. When we talk about identity theft, we're talking about actual misuse of someone's personal information. It can be misused either to fraudulently obtain goods or services, like if someone uses your credit card to buy a big screen TV, or if someone uses your social security number to get a tax refund. Or it can be identity theft to hide from the government or law enforcement or other people who perform background checks. What we're distinguishing here is misuse from exposure. There's a lot of talk about data breaches these days, and of course exposure of information in a data breach is a very serious matter. But what we're talking about here when we talk about identity theft is the actual misuse of that information. So how big a problem is identity theft? According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 17.6 million people were victims of identity theft in 2014. That amounted to about 7% of the U.S. population at that time. More recently, the FTC, where we take identity theft complaints, we got over 370,000 complaints to us about identity theft in 2017. So what are some of these types of identity theft? There are all sorts of different ones. It can be opening credit cards, utility accounts, applying for employment. And today, of course, we're talking about tax identity theft, but it's important to remember that if you're a victim of tax identity theft, or if you're working helping someone who is, that most likely they had their social security number exposed and misused, because that's what's used for tax identity theft. And once that social security number is out there, they may be victims of other types of ID theft, because that social security number can be used to open new credit card accounts, open utility accounts, apply for employment. And then we need to remember the impact on victims. It's not just as simple as changing over your credit card, especially when it comes to taxes and not getting a tax refund that you may be counting on, or at least having that refund delayed. There can also be denial of credit if maybe you're trying to get a mortgage and then you can't get that house because your credit is messed up because of the identity theft. It can be denial of public benefits if someone was using your social security number to work and there's a work history in your name, so they say you're no longer disabled, so you can't get public benefits. It can even be denial of medical care or improper treatment if the thief's medical records are merged with yours. Now, of course, today we're focusing on tax identity theft, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Eva to talk more about the stress and anxiety and other victim impact that she says and she sees in working directly with identity theft victims.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa covered the scope of the problem, how many millions of people are affected, and what some of those tangible consequences are, like the denial of credit. But there are a lot of emotions and even physical symptoms that people suffer when they're victims of identity theft. The reason that we know this is because we conduct the aftermath study on an annual basis, where we survey the folks that we've helped the year before, and we ask them about more than just how much time did you spend resolving this problem and how much money did it cost you out of pocket. And while that's a valid measurement and a valid statistic, we think it's really important to understand how this is truly affecting people. And one of the misconceptions that I've dealt with my entire career is that economic crimes, fraud, and those types of crimes, of which identity theft falls into that category, they really aren't that big of a deal. It's not a violent crime, so it really isn't bothering people that much. And this question that was answered in our survey, how distressing was this misuse of your information? So more than 3/4 of people were certainly distressed, and 3/4 on the nose were severely distressed by this event in their lives. That should disabuse anyone from thinking that, oh, well, it's just a financial crime. It's not really affecting people that much. They've been made whole, through their bank or something like that. The emotional reactions that go along with it, I realize that these probably aren't a surprise for anybody. But that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness, loss of ability to trust, it can have downstream effects on people, the way they engage in the outside world, in commerce. So if you're a business owner, this definitely has an effect. But that last one, suicidal, 7% of people actually had such a significant incident that this created so much grief for them that they felt suicidal. That may be hard to understand, but as Lisa and I go through more of some of the challenges that are created when an event like this occurs, it will, I think, allow people to wrap their head around just how devastating this can be. This is a new question this year, where we asked folks, well, if it did create some of these strong emotional reactions, what did you do to help you get through that? So with 1/4 of our respondents telling us they actually had to seek professional help, I think that just goes to further highlight that this is not one of those simple situations where you just make a phone call and it doesn't affect you any further and you're no longer thinking about it. It actually can really erode your trust in those mechanisms that are in place to help you and protect you. And when they've demonstrably failed, it really rattles your trust in all of those processes. We also asked folks about the physical symptoms that they were having when they were going through this identity theft issue. And things like sleep disturbances and an inability to concentrate, fatigue, headaches. If you consider that most of these folks, they have lives that they're living, jobs that they're going to, families that they're raising, relationships that they're working with, these all affect your ability to really be a whole human being functioning in the outside world. I know for me personally, when I don't get enough sleep and my sleep is disturbed, I'm just not on top of my game. So when someone is going through something like this, it doesn't affect just them. It affects their family members. It affects their community. It can even affect their employer.
Thanks, Eva. That's a great overview of the types of effects that tax identity theft and identity theft generally can have on people. And it's really important that we keep that in mind as we work with identity theft victims. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to talk about what is tax identity theft. We talked about identity theft broadly, but now we're going to focus on tax identity theft in particular. And what we're really talking about here is when somebody files a fraudulent tax return using your Social Security number. And why they're doing that is to get a refund and basically get money. All they need is your Social Security number, which they can buy on the black market, and then they can file for a refund. And then when you go to try to get your refund, you get a notice that there's a duplicate filing and your refund may be delayed. So that's the main thing we're talking about when we talk about tax identity theft. This slide also lists a few other types of tax-related identity theft, which can include when someone claims your children as dependents, or when someone claims a refund using a deceased taxpayer's information. It can also include if somebody earns wages under your Social Security number, and then the IRS says, how come you didn't pay taxes on these wages, when in fact it was the thief earning those wages, not you. So those are the different types of tax identity theft, but the main one that we're really talking about, and the most prevalent one, is that stolen identity refund fraud. So let's look at some trends about tax identity theft. Between 2016 and 2017, total identity theft complaints have gone down 7%. This is based on the FTC's Consumer Sentinel data of all the identity theft complaints that are filed with us. Tax identity theft complaints are down 46%, and IRS imposter scam complaints are down 54%. So the good news is that identity theft is down overall, and it appears to be driven, at least in part, by a decline in tax identity theft. And imposter scams are way down, but still, these are big problems that consumers should be aware of, which is why we're focusing on them today. Let me just show you a little bit more about the trends before we get into the meat of the discussion. If you look at these broad identity theft complaint trends, you'll see here the decrease in 7% in overall identity theft complaints from last year. And then the next slide shows the scope of the tax identity theft problem. You can see that the percentage of complaints that we're receiving relating to tax identity theft is going down. In 2015, it was almost half our complaints that were tax related, and now it's down to less than a quarter. So not only are the overall number of identity theft complaints declining, but the tax ID theft complaints are a smaller percentage of that smaller number. So if you look on the next slide, you'll see very visually how that plays out. The top line there, the light blue line, is the total ID theft complaints, and the darker blue line below is the tax ID theft complaints over time. So you can see how they're kind of going down pretty much in unison. Now let's look at a bigger picture of the top identity theft complaints. So you may be wondering, if tax identity theft is going down, what's going up? You can see here credit card identity theft is back as our #1 identity theft complaint. Tax is still #2 and was #1 for quite a while, but credit cards, and in particular new account credit card identity theft, is now the top complaint. Other top complaints you'll see there are bank accounts, mobile phone, and utilities. And it's very interesting to note, you can't see this on the chart, but what our data shows is that for all those categories, credit card, bank accounts, mobile phone, and utilities, it's a new account ID theft, which is happening more often. And that's particularly notable for tax ID theft victims because, like I said before, a tax ID theft victim, that usually means their Social Security number has been exposed, and that's what's also going to be used to open new accounts in their name. So now let's take a quick look at IRS imposter scams and the statistics we're seeing there and the trends we're seeing there. I also mentioned a big decline in IRS imposter scams between 2016 and 2017. And you'll see those here as well as on the next slide, which shows them more graphically. What we know happened here is that in October 2016, Department of Justice, the Treasury Inspector General, and the FTC, and other agencies together did a massive raid on Indian call centers, which shut down a bunch of call centers that were doing these IRS imposter scams. And since that time, there has been a dramatic decline in the number of IRS imposter scams reported. And that trend, the number has stayed down since then and continued to decline further. Now, while it looks like all these numbers are decreasing, you can still see it's still a big issue. So it's important for us to know how tax identity theft happens, how IRS imposters happen, and how to reduce the likelihood of it happening, and also what to do if you're a victim. So now I'll turn it back to Eva to talk a bit about how tax identity theft happens.
So there are so many pathways to your compromised information. And a lot of times we think about the online vulnerabilities, but I want to remind people that there are offline low-tech ways that you can self-compromise or that your information can be compromised. Lost or stolen wallets and smartphones, especially smartphones. I want to remind folks that that's a small computer that you have in your hand that you're carrying with you, and it is loaded with data and personal information. Theft by family and friends. We talk to folks on a regular basis who have discovered that identity theft can often be a crime of opportunity. So if you have someone in your family who is perhaps going through some issues, whether they're addiction issues or just having a rough time in their life, and you know that they may be prone to either theft or something of that nature, don't worry about hurting people's feelings. Lock up your information and make sure that it's secure. And if you live a lifestyle where perhaps you just have a lot of people in and out of the house that you're not able to directly supervise, maybe you have caregivers coming in and out, maybe your kids are of that age where there just are a lot of teens or young people in and out of the house, make sure that you've locked that information up, because that is a key pathway to having that information not only stolen, but then actually used fraudulently. Stolen mail, the imposter scams where someone calls you and pretends to be the IRS, someone from a trusted entity, and then asks you for your information. These are all really important pathways to pay attention to, because they need this information before they can take the next step and actually file those fraudulent documents. Now, here's the online piece. Data breaches, absolutely growing massively this year. The ITRC has been capturing information on data breaches for over a decade, and the hacking prevalence of large companies that are housing your data, we've all heard about that. We heard about Equifax, we've heard about previously the Anthem breach, but I do want people to realize that even smaller organizations that they're doing business with, including their employer, can be vulnerable. Now, the CEO spear phishing scams or data breaches that have been happening over the last couple of years, this is where a thief pretends to be a trusted individual within the organization, usually a high-level individual, and requests from the HR person or someone that has access to payroll records, sends a fake email and says, hey, send me the payroll records, send me the tax records for the team. And unfortunately, people are falling for it, and they send this information out. That W-2 is a wealth of information about you. So if there's one thing I would really encourage people to do when they're thinking about how this happens, is have a discussion with your employer. We captured 197 publicly reported CEO spear phishing data breaches last year alone. So it is happening, it can happen. Have that conversation with your employer about what kind of training they're doing and how they are ensuring that your employee data is being protected, because that is the data that the thieves use to file that fraudulent tax return. Of course, the warning signs are somewhat obvious. Having your Social Security number stolen or compromised, it's not necessarily a warning sign that it's being used, but it puts you at an increased risk. So that's something to keep in mind. The delay in being able to get your refund can be a sign of fraud, but by far, the most common way that people are now discovering that they are a victim is that direct notification from the IRS. I have to give that organization credit for really putting a lot of detailed fraud analytics into their processes so that they can do a better job of detecting this tax identity theft, because it is such a huge problem. And what people will often hear is that, oh, your return has already been filed. They will sometimes get a notice that they didn't report all of their income when they know that they did. And other times they will get a notification that, oh, that Social Security number for your dependent has been used elsewhere or has had a separate tax return filed. So you've got this child that you're claiming as a dependent, and yet there's another tax return that's been filed within the system. So that's the most common way that people find out they've been a victim. Now, I'm also going to talk about how to lessen your chance of becoming a victim of identity theft, and I want to start very broadly because I think it's important to realize that this starts with folks understanding that your identity is valuable regardless of your perceived status. I talk to folks on a regular basis who say things to me like, who would want my identity? They can have it. I don't have a great credit score. They have this notion that because perhaps they're not a high income or high wage earner, high net value individual, that they really aren't susceptible and that no one would want it. And nothing could be further from the truth. A thief doesn't care about what your credit score is. They can use your information. They don't care what your true status to the IRS would be, and that maybe you wouldn't even get a refund in reality. They are making all of that information up, and they are skewing it in such a way that they are going to get the highest refund they possibly can. So your true status is really not the determining factor in how valuable your identity is to a thief. And then I want people to think of their identity not as this nebulous thing that is this extension out there of themselves, but it really is a part of you that's tangible. It is a piece of your life, just like your arm or your hand, that you have to take care of. Just like you would take care of your physical body, you can practice good identity hygiene and take care of your identity. These small actions add up. This isn't something where you have to spend hours every day working on it. It's something that should become routine and rote part of your life, little things. I use the analogy of brushing your teeth because, we don't go to our doctor and say, hey, doc, how do I get super healthy? And the doctor says, go home and brush your teeth. You do that, say, all right, I'm done. That's it. I don't ever have to do that again. No, it's an ongoing process. You brush your teeth twice a day, 3 times a day, you floss, maybe you try to get enough sleep, you eat right. You do all of these little things on a regular basis to take care and maintain that part of your life. It is exactly the same concept with your identity, and I will get into some of those action items in a couple of slides. I also want to make sure you realize it's not just what you do, but what you don't do. Not addressing problems and issues as they come up because you don't make them a priority can really have devastating consequences. And very quickly, just so I can make this real, I'm going to tell 2 stories about 2 folks that not only did they come to the ITRC for services, these are actually people I know. These are people that I've dealt with for many years and have a relationship with. Of course, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Veronica, the example I'll give here is that while she was going through a refi on her house, she received a notification that there were some things on her credit report and it was impacting her credit score marginally. And she called me in a panic and said, what do? I gave her all of the materials and the steps that she needed to avail herself of. However, at the end of the day, it didn't affect her refi. So it did not put up this roadblock that stopped her from moving forward in her life, which is very typical of identity theft victimization. That's how most people discover it. What it did was give her a red flag, but because it didn't impede her progress, she didn't make it a priority. She did not do the things that I told her to do and do the follow-up. You fast forward 3 months later, everything had blown up. It only took a short couple of months from that original date of discovery to her having huge accounts on her credit, new accounts that were now in collections, that she was being harassed. Had she taken the time to address that, she would have saved herself a lot of heartache and stress. Now, the story with Edgar, this is one where this person knew it was a problem but kept putting it off and not making it a priority. This is a friend of mine that had moved to a more rural community in the eastern part of San Diego and now had this mailbox sitting out on the highway about 2 miles from their house, completely unsecured, very dark, really just could have put a sign on it saying, steal my mail. we talked about what needed to be done. It was on the list of priorities, but kept getting shoved down, getting that locked mailbox and replacing it until, of course, what happened? The mail was stolen during tax time. So in January, all the mail was stolen out of many of these mailboxes. And so I tell you these things because what you don't do can also affect you. It's really important to pay attention to these tips and try to do them a little bit at a time. I love this card, our shred card, because it's easy to remember, and these are very easy action items. Strengthening your passwords and privacy settings is something that you can do on an ongoing basis, making sure that, for Pete's sake, please, if password is one of your passwords, I encourage you to change it as soon as you're done listening to this webinar. And looking at the privacy settings so that you know how much is being shared about you with the different platforms and services that you use. It's super important, and it's super easy. And it's becoming more and more transparent every day. We've already talked about how we should handle our PII, our personally identifying information, with care and not overshare. This is, again, a really easy way to remember it. Reading your credit reports annually, and you can get this free through annualcreditreport.com. You can do it once every 4 months with one of the different of the 3 credit reporting agencies, and that's a way for you to stay on top of it every year for free. Emptying your purse or wallet is another one, especially the ladies out there who throw everything in their purse because they're busy. If you're carrying around things that you don't need for that day, whether it's bills that you're planning on paying, maybe it's your kids' college transcripts, which, by the way, have their social security number on them, unfortunately. All of that stuff that you're just carrying around when you don't need it, if your purse is lost or stolen, you've just given more information to the thief. And then the last one, once you have this knowledge, discuss them with friends, share it with the people around you. I know it's not the best cocktail party discussion, but it can be really interesting, and you may be able to really help somebody and save them from heartache later. So specifically, our top 3 tips for how you can minimize your risk of tax identity theft. This sounds really basic, but really know your tax preparer. Make sure that this is someone that you've done some homework on. You've checked to make sure that they have the appropriate, either if they're CPA, either their licensure or they're registered as a certified tax preparer. Just doing that little bit of homework can help you to not deal with somebody who could simply be out there trying to get this information. Unfortunately, there are fraud rings out there that this is all they do, is pose as legitimate businesses so that they can gather that information. When should you file? If at all possible, file first, beat the crooks. The longer that you delay that filing, and I know there are motivations for doing that for certain people, so just try to do it as early as possible. The more you shorten a window of opportunity for a thief to beat you to it and file first. And then just some basics on how to do it. If you're mailing that return, don't leave it in your mailbox on your house. Actually, take it directly to the post office. When you're filing electronically, make sure that whatever, especially if you're using a software provider or platform, make sure that you acknowledge that this is a legitimate platform and that they're using a secure network. Next slide. And then very quickly for businesses. Now this applies to tax preparation and CPAs, but it really applies for any business. Protecting your customer data truly is your responsibility. Now, while this is a shared stakeholder responsibility, and we are talking to consumers about what they can do, the onus isn't completely on them. Businesses that are collecting data, storing data, and using that data have a responsibility to be good stewards of it. Now, it can happen to you, and I talk to businesses on a regular basis that tell me, well, I don't have any data. I don't have anything important or collect anything sensitive. And my next question to them is always, well, do you have employees? Because that employee data is pretty sensitive and pretty important, and you should be making that a priority. I also talk to people that sit there and go, well, who would want my data? It's not that valuable. They acknowledge that they have it, but they still don't see it as valuable. And the reality is, even data that is not social security numbers as we expand what is used to identify and authenticate us, even things like behavioral metrics can absolutely have value to thieves, and it needs to be treated as such. And for the small business owners out there, having a breach or compromising your customers' data, it can truly be a business-ending event. Not necessarily because of the consequences of the incident rates of identity theft post-breach, but really because of the reputational damage. When you go back to those aftermath feelings of the victims that I touched on in the first part of this presentation, that loss of trust, that also is a loss of trust for the businesses that they feel bear some responsibility and they're becoming victims. So it truly can be a business-ending event, and you are better off being more prepared and protecting the data than trying to clean up the mess afterwards. We've talked quite a bit about some of the other tips. So really the one that I want to focus on here is the be careful what you share, particularly the don't give that information unless you know who's asking and why. We are bombarded with requests from outside entities that look very legitimate asking us for our personal information. And I would tell you one of our best tips is it's okay to ask, why do you need this? Why do you need my social security number? And what's going to happen if I don't give it to you? Will you still provide me with services? At least then you can make an educated choice about whether or not you're going to provide it. Oftentimes the vendors or whoever you're dealing with will say, oh, we don't need it, it's just on the form. Then you don't even have to fill it out. And when they do say we absolutely need it and here's why, then you can decide, do I want to take my business elsewhere?
Thanks, Eva. Now I'm going to talk about...
Now I'm going to hand it over to Lisa. She's going to talk about the great service offerings from identitytheft.gov. And we also have some resources at the end of that presentation from ITRC. So there's a lot of great information on what to do if you're a victim from two entities that have been doing this for a long time.
Great, thanks, Eva. So I'm going to talk about what to do if you are a victim of identity theft, and I'm going to focus on identitytheft.gov, but as Eva mentioned, ITRC has great resources too, and the FTC partners with ITRC to send some of our most complicated identity theft complaints to ITRC for additional assistance. But we do encourage people as a first step to go to identitytheft.gov because many people can handle things on their own using identitytheft.gov. What it does is it allows you to report identity theft and get a personal recovery plan. And you'll see in the upper right-hand corner that we have the entire website available in Spanish as well. And now for this tax filing season, we have a very exciting development, which is you can now report tax identity theft to both the FTC and the IRS at identitytheft.gov. And I'll walk you through how you would do that. This is a screen you would see when you type in identitytheft.gov on your computer. And then if you click on Get Started, you would get to the next screen. And on the next screen, you'll see, next slide please, you'll see a bunch of different identity theft types that you can pick. You can just report identity theft and it will ask you which type, or you can report that someone filed a tax return using your information, basically tax identity theft. There also are other categories if you just want information about identity theft because you're worried about it, or if your information was exposed in a data breach, because like I said earlier, if it's a data breach and your information has been exposed but not misused, there's a different set of advice than if there's actual misuse. So here we have someone who wants to report tax identity theft. So they've clicked on that dark blue line, the second one down, and this is what they'll get. They'll get 6 different screens that walk them through to report their identity theft and input information about what went on. And then you'll see those 3 icons there. What they'll get after they report all those information are an FTC identity theft report, plus an IRS identity theft affidavit, plus a personalized recovery plan, which will walk them through the steps to take. So let's look a little further. If you were to report identity theft, you would get this screen, which has you input information about the tax ID theft, whether you got a notice from the IRS about it or not, and what tax years were involved. Then after you've gone through those 6 screens that you see listed at the top that include your information, suspect information, and other information about the incident, you will then get to the next screen, which shows that you'll get both the FTC identity theft report and the IRS one. And I'll tell you why that's important that you get both. On the next screen, you'll see the FTC's identity theft report. And this can be used to exercise certain rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is important because, as I've said before, if your Social Security number is exposed, then you're at risk for new account identity theft. So if that happens, a lot of times you may start with tax identity theft, and a few months later, especially if you don't address things like Eva alluded to, you may find new account identity theft and other steps. So it's important to have this identity theft report, and in many cases you'll no longer even need a police report as a matter of course for many types of identity theft. In particular, for tax identity theft, you will not need a police report. This identity theft report can help you clean up your credit, and then the IRS form, which you'll see on the next slide, will allow you to report tax identity theft to the IRS. And identitytheft.gov will pre-populate this form. It'll also pre-populate the FTC identity theft report based on all the information that you input there. So everything will be set for you, and you're able to actually send this form directly to the IRS through identitytheft.gov, making the process really easy for consumers. On the next slide, you'll see that it'll check off for you, showing that you've completed both reports and they're ready to go and send. You also have the option to create an account. If you want to, you can create an account which allows you to come back into identitytheft.gov to update your account and to track your progress. Next slide, please. And when you create an account, we protect that account by using multi-factor authentication, which basically means you'll create a password, and then you'll also get a call or a text with a PIN so that we can make sure the person logging back into that account is really you. On the next slide, you'll see the personalized recovery plan. This is the type of recovery plan you'd get if you were to report tax ID theft. You see up top, this person has created an account, and they've also successfully submitted their IRS form to the IRS, which starts the process with the IRS of investigating your tax ID theft and hopefully clearing things up so that you can get whatever money due to you. So this is an example of the recovery plan. It'll tell you things like contact the IRS, place a fraud alert, review your credit reports, and consider an extended fraud alert or credit freeze. And then for each of those orange lines, if you click on them, they'll give you more detailed information and links. For example, if you were to click on contact the IRS, you would get this screen, which tells you what to do if you get an IRS notice in the mail. It also nicely shows you that you have actually completed your IRS form and submitted it, and tells you the date that it was submitted on. And then it gives you other advice about steps to take and a specialized phone number at the IRS for additional assistance if these steps don't resolve your situation. Now on the next slide, you'll see that in addition to identitytheft.gov, we have a lot of print materials which are available to order in bulk for free. We have these all both in English and in Spanish. You can order as many as you want and co-brand them. So if you're working with identity theft victims, you're welcome to order them, put them out in your lobby, share them in your communities when you give presentations. What we have first is the recovery plan document, which basically goes through identitytheft.gov and has print versions of a lot of the same information that's on the website. And then we have shorter publications just very simply about what to know, what to do about identity theft. One specially for military personnel that covers things like the active duty alert. One specially for child identity theft because the remedies are different if it's a child. And then also one about data breaches and what to know, what to do. So we encourage you all to order those all, again, for free in bulk at ftc.gov/bulk order. Also, Eva did mention ITRC has resources on identity theft, and identitytheft.gov will refer victims to ITRC if the steps taken through identitytheft.gov don't resolve their situation. So we're very grateful that ITRC is there to help those people who need that extra help in resolving their identity theft situation. Now, before we close, I do want to talk about IRS imposter scams. We've been talking a lot about tax identity theft, but another related problem are these imposter scams. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about where somebody pretends to be from the IRS and they call you saying that you owe back taxes. They might also threaten to arrest you or deport you or suspend your driver's license if you don't pay, or maybe merely just to sue you. They may know certain information, like all or part of your social security number, or they may know nothing. Or in my case, I've gotten a couple of these calls, and they were robocalls, so they really didn't know anything, and they were just calling a bunch of phone numbers saying that your account is past due and you owe taxes and they're going to sue you if you don't respond. Of course, we advise consumers do not call back those phone numbers. So what are these imposter scams and how can you recognize them? Well, they may rig caller ID to make it look like the call is from the DC area, which is the 202 area code. They may even make it appear as the IRS on your caller ID. So it's important consumers know that you can't trust caller ID anymore because it's very easy to spoof caller ID numbers. But some other things you can use to figure out that this is an imposter scam are some red flags, like if the caller demands immediate payment by prepaid debit card or by wire transfer, those are big red flags. And sometimes they'll send IRS emails to try to make it look more legitimate, or even use Google Maps to make it sound like the sheriff's right outside your house. They can look on Google Maps and say things like, oh, I'm outside your house. I see your house has a red door and it has 5 windows and your car is parked in front of it. And they can make it sound very legitimate and very scary. So what is important for people to know is that the IRS will not ask people to pay with prepaid cards or wire transfers. That's not how they take payment. They also won't ask for a credit card number over the phone. And they're not going to threaten arrest, deportation, or loss of driver's license. That's not the way they operate. Some other things to know is that if the IRS needs to contact you, they generally do it first by mail. I should add a note here that you may have heard that there are third-party debt collectors now who are collecting IRS debts. And what's going on there is you may get a call from a legitimate third-party debt collector, but if you do, first you should get a letter from them, and it should have a PIN number in it. So do not trust any calls, even if they're from a debt collector, unless you've gotten a letter first and a PIN number, and that caller can let you know what the PIN number is that matches your letter. So we used to be able to just say, if you get any call claiming to be from the IRS, it's a scam. Now we have to be a little more nuanced since there are these third-party debt collectors, but you can still recognize the scam because they're not going to ask for payment by prepaid card, wire transfer, credit card, and because they're not going to threaten and harass you, and because you should get this letter and PIN number first. So it's really
Lisa,
important. One
of the things that we're reminding people is that, we always tell people to go to the source, just like the FTC does, and a legitimate debt collector, even if they are trying to collect legitimate back taxes, if you tell them that you are going to verify that this is legitimate by calling the IRS directly, they are not going to give you a hard time about it. They are going to afford that to you because they know how rife it is. So don't be afraid, even if you do get a call where you think, well, maybe this is legitimate because I do have that issue. You go directly right back to the IRS. Lisa has the number here on the slide, and verify it directly with them. No one is going to give you a hard time for wanting to take care of yourself and protect yourself from scams.
Right, that's a really good point. Thanks for adding that, because a lot of times people do think, oh, well, maybe I do owe some back taxes. I'm not sure. The tax code is very complicated and maybe I do owe some back taxes. But if you're not sure, you should call the IRS directly at the number here, 800-829-1040, to check it out. I also want to remind people to report IRS imposter scams. Please report them, because even though the numbers are going down, they're going down because people did report these scams. Your reports help us catch scammers like we did in the raid in India in October 2016. So please continue to report so we can try to continue to reduce the numbers of IRS imposter scams. You can report to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. A lot of people think report to the IRS, but TIGTA is actually the entity that handles IRS imposter scams. So you can report to them at tigta.gov or 800-366-4484. You can also report IRS imposter scams to the FTC at ftc.gov/complaint or 877-FTC-HELP. So that's the reporting information for imposter scams. And as a reminder, for identity theft and tax identity theft, you can report at identitytheft.gov. So please, please, please do report these problems, and please share what you learned today on this webinar to help protect not only you, but your friends and your family from tax identity theft and IRS imposters. And I'm going to thank Eva myself, but I'm also going to turn it over to Ari for some final wrap up and thank yous. But thank you to Eva and ITRC. It's always a pleasure working with you, and we appreciate you being involved in this webinar.
Right back at you, Lisa. We're really pleased to be able to work together to help more and more victims of identity theft and scams and fraud.
Thanks. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either of our organizations. We have a few different ways to reach us. On the left, we have ITRC's contact, and on the right, we have ways to reach the FTC, including Lisa's email at the bottom. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any comments, any questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and have a happy Tax Identity Theft Awareness Week.